Hi, my name is Lizzie Chan, and I'm a member of the CPR Institute's Young Leaders in Alternative Dispute Resolution. I'm delighted to host today's episode of our CPR Y-ADR Corporate Counsel interview series. The Y-ADR seeks to educate the next generation of young leaders in ADR on the full spectrum of dispute prevention and resolution mechanisms, and to provide an insider's view into how CPR's community of in-house counsel, external counsel, and other experts in the field are using dispute prevention and resolution techniques to manage conflict to enable purpose. As part of this goal, I'm hosting this corporate counsel interview series, asking in-house counsel to share their perspectives on best ADR practices and to share their advice for young practitioners. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Allen Waxman, who is the CEO and president of CPR and has previously held general counsel roles in several life sciences companies. He's based in New York. Hi, Allen. We're so delighted to have you with us.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
My first question for you today is, can you tell us a bit about your career experience as general counsel in different life sciences companies and your current role as president and CEO of CPR?
Sure. Thank you very much, Lizzie. And I've been fortunate to have a very varied career, which has been of great interest and a lot of learning opportunities, a lot of exciting endeavors. I spent part of my career at law firms as a partner, really focused mostly on dispute management in litigation and counseling around disputes. And then, as you noted, I've been the general counsel at several different life sciences companies and also a business leader. I was at a biotech company, Roivant Sciences, as the general counsel. I was at Eisai, a Japanese-based pharmaceutical company, where I held both the general counsel role, and then I was the head of the market access business team. And then I was also the global general counsel of Pfizer, and I started there running its litigation group. So each of those has taught me something about disputes from the beginning of my career, where I was a litigator at Williams and Connolly, to this point in time where then I became the president and CEO of CPR, which is, is very much focused on how to more effectively and efficiently resolve disputes and also how to prevent them in the first place. And as you noted, our overall mission is really to manage conflict to enable purpose, and the recognition that businesses and their employees are not engaged in their work for conflict and disputes. They're engaged in their work to really achieve the purpose that they set out in their work. And so we're trying to help folks and enable them to do that.
You've had such a varied and distinguished career. So given your experience in different life sciences companies of different sizes and with different dispute resolution needs, do you have any preferred ADR tools for different contexts?
Yes, and thank you for the compliment. I think that alternative dispute resolution, or what I've come to really refer to appropriate dispute resolution, very much turns on the facts and circumstances of the kinds of conflict you anticipate and how to best manage those. And that runs from better negotiation skills, better use of dispute prevention mechanisms, because we know that conflict is going to arise. Sometimes conflict can even be productive in business relationships, but how to put in place mechanisms to avoid the conflict from turning into a dispute. The use of mediation is a wonderful tool, and really a tool that can be used in a whole variety of contexts. And then also to arbitration, where I think in the life sciences world, arbitration, if you are looking for an adjudicative mechanism, and that is what you need to resolve your legal dispute, can be a preferred mechanism because of the confidentiality it offers, because of the greater flexibility it offers, because of the ability to have a hand in selecting the decision makers for what are often very complicated, very scientifically oriented disputes. And so having that mechanism available can be very useful in the life sciences context. And then, of course, there are times when you need to litigate in court because of the nature of a particular dispute. And I think that needs to be available as well. So there really is a full spectrum there. And in the context of having been the general counsel at a small biotech company versus the general counsel at a global company like a Pfizer, the different needs of your clients has to play a significant role in what kind of mechanism you're going to choose.
You mentioned many different tools in the appropriate dispute resolution toolbox. So what are some factors that you consider when you're drafting a dispute resolution clause?
So I think it goes back to what I was just saying. You need to know your client. You need to know its needs. And so is this a client where you're going to want to start off in a tiered process with a negotiation? And if so, who are you to want to assign to be the negotiator? That could look very different at a biotech company like Roivant Sciences that I was at versus a global pharmaceutical company like Pfizer. You may not want to assign the CEO similarly for Pfizer as you would perhaps at a biotech company. Similarly, the use of mediation. I think mediation is important to use and can be helpful in any of those contexts. And do you want to necessarily lead with that, provide flexibility around its use? And then how do you feel about arbitration as a mechanism? Are you likely to have commercial kinds of disputes when you enter into such a clause, in which instance arbitration can be very helpful, or IP or other kinds of disputes when maybe you really want to focus on mediating the dispute instead of arbitrating it? I do think it becomes very important, and this, of course, is very central to what we do at CPR through our dispute resolution services, to identify the right provider, the right rule set to use when you are picking, when you're drafting your clause. Because at the time you're drafting your clause, you don't exactly know what kind of dispute you're going to confront. So I think you want to make sure that you're working with a rule set, a set of procedures, a set of protocols that allow for optionality. So at the time the dispute arises, you have choices, and the rules, be it of CPR or other institutions, often become a proxy for being able to make choices at the time the dispute arises. Similarly, when you're looking at a provider, what kind of administrative support are they likely to provide for your dispute? Again, are they going to help you provide options to you? What kind of panel do they have? And then finally, in thinking about your dispute resolution clause, be careful to think about where you're going to situate the resolution of the dispute. In other words, where is the seat going to be? You want to make sure you're selecting a jurisdiction that supports arbitration and the outcome of arbitrations, or in the aftermath of the Singapore Convention, that supports mediation and the outcomes of mediation. So I think it is a multifactorial analysis that starts with knowing your client and its needs, and then anticipating the kinds of disputes that are going to arise.
You've mentioned that you've worked at different companies who, because of their size and other factors, have different dispute resolution needs. And you've spoken a little bit about what the services of CPR as well. I was wondering if you could speak a little more about what CPR does as an ADR services provider and providing different dispute resolution services to meet these different needs.
Sure. Well, one of the things that we do, and that is somewhat unique for CPR, is we rely upon the end users, those who actually are engaged in the disputes, the companies, the law firms that represent them, neutrals who are involved in the disputes, to really give guidance to our dispute resolution services arm as to what are the imperatives for resolving those disputes. And those imperatives get captured in the rules, procedures, and protocols that are generated by the thought leadership arm of CPR, the CPR Institute, and then are used by the dispute resolution services arm of CPR. So we start with really making sure we're capturing those imperatives. And then we try to provide the full panoply of services, everything from early neutral evaluation, which may be helpful to parties as they're assessing their own positions and cases, to mediation, to arbitration, to some combination of mediation and arbitration. We just put together a concurrent mediation arbitration protocol because the parties were commenting they thought that would be more effective to help facilitate resolution. And then our administrative arm, the folks who are engaged in case management with us, are very experienced and will sit down with parties when the dispute arises and try to get a better sense of what is the nature of the dispute, what are their needs. If it's an arbitration they're looking for, we go through an extensive profiling process of what kind of decision maker makes sense for the kind of dispute that arose. We try to do that really at the front end before we begin to identify the slate of candidates. We do the same thing from a mediation perspective, really trying to identify who might be the appropriate mediator. And then part and parcel of all of that, because again, this is something I think the community is demanding and that we need, we try to also focus on providing a slate of diverse neutrals. We believe that diversity is really important to the decision-making process or the facilitation process when it comes to mediation. And so we're really trying to make sure that we're teeing up candidates who are diverse for managing those disputes. So basically, we really try to be responsive, again, to that optionality that the parties need and what they're looking for in resolving their matters.
You are really doing such amazing work at CPR, and I think CPR is a leading ADR think tank. From my part, being part of the Young Leaders in Alternative Dispute Resolution group, I've learned so much about different ADR toolkits, and we hope to do our best to further CPR's goal among the next generation.
Let me say that we are so proud and fortunate to have the Y-ADR group, and I think you're an exemplar of that. And we think there's a lot we can learn from the next generation in terms of how best to prevent conflict from turning into disputes and also how to resolve those disputes. So we view Y-ADR as a bit of an incubator for new ideas at CPR and what we might do to really help parties, again, back to our mission, manage conflict to enable purpose.
Thank you so much, Allen. I'd now like to dive a little deeper into your comments about mediation. So in your experience, what has worked well and what has not worked well for mediations? And when you were working at the life sciences companies, did you tend to hire external counsel to do mediations, or would that be handled internally?
So let me say, I think generally we would hire external counsel to be involved with us in the mediation process. Interestingly enough, if the case was big enough and the exposure warranted it, we might have different counsel, outside counsel, focus on the mediation side of things versus the dispute side of things. We sometimes refer to that as the war and peace teams, and really trying to bring a different perspective to those two exercises. But those were in very large matters that would warrant that division. Otherwise, we would work with our outside counsel to engage in mediation. And I was, at all of the companies I was at, a very big believer in mediation. I see very little downside and tremendous upside to engaging in mediation to both help us as a party focus on the nature of our needs, of our dispute, to help us learn really the perspective of the other side. We may learn things we hadn't thought about, or they may be framed very differently than we had framed them ourselves, notwithstanding our best efforts to understand the other side. And then a skilled mediator, I think, is able to take those needs and translate them into finding common ground in ways often the parties themselves, again, notwithstanding their best efforts, may struggle in doing because of the roles that they're playing in being advocates for their side. And so I think that exercise can be very helpful, even if you don't end up resolving the entire dispute. You may end up resolving some parts of it. You may identify issues that can be resolved more quickly. What doesn't work well, I think we would engage outside counsel. I would say most of the time, our outside counsel was very open to the process. Sometimes you'll engage outside counsel, or you may confront outside counsel in a mediation process that's really not interested in resolving the dispute. And so I think you have to be careful as a client in underscoring your desire to really make full use of the mediation process and creating the expectation that you really want to engage in that process in an effort to resolve the dispute. So that's just one cautionary item. But overall, I think mediation can be very useful for all parties. And no matter whether I was at a small company or a larger company, I think it worked very well for us.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I'd now like to pivot to your career and your personal insights. So having transitioned from a law firm to in-house roles, what are some things that you wish you had known as a law firm partner?
That's a great question. I think probably going in-house opened my eyes up to the myriad of challenges that the company is confronting that go well beyond the particular dispute at hand, and that may create pressures in a way that, as an outside counsel, I probably was too myopic in understanding and appreciating. So the first thing I would have taught myself was really to make sure I was doing more to understand not just the conflict at hand from the client's perspective, but all of the context in which that conflict was occurring for the business needs of the client. So really encouraging, trying to use every opportunity to get to know the business of the client, the imperatives of that business, and that can help allow you to provide better counsel and advice as you're working through a given matter, a given dispute for the client. So just really opening up that lens more broadly.
Understanding the client is so important for the work of external lawyers. In your experience, do you have any best practices on managing costs and budgets?
Sure. And by the way, back to understanding the client, I think the onus is also on the client to help their outside counsel better understand them. So I think it is a bilateral relationship, right? It's not just the outside counsel that has to figure out the puzzle. It is the client that should be taking affirmative steps to educate their outside counsel about their business imperatives. One of the most important ways to facilitate that conversation is in discussing budgets. I always thought that as an in-house counsel, one of our most fruitful and richest areas of discussion was around budgets for a matter, was really trying to set the strategy for the matter and translating that into the budgets. And so what kinds of motions practice were we going to engage in? What kinds of discovery process might we engage in? What kind of hearing process? How many witnesses and so forth? not to view that in isolation, but to view that as part of the overall strategy of the matter. And that overall strategy gets us back into the overall context in which the client is operating. So I know budgets are sometimes not something that folks on either side of the aisle, in-house counsel or outside counsel, may favor engaging in. Sometimes they're viewed as a real hassle. I think they are a real golden opportunity for that better understanding and alignment to occur.
That's so interesting. I hadn't previously thought about costs and budgets as being a way to focus on the scope and strategy of a dispute, but that's really good advice I'm going to take away with me. My next question, what's your view on the effective use of a data-driven approach to resolving disputes?
Yeah, I think that the way of the future is all about the data. And so I think it's very important for outside counsel and in-house counsel, and I know this is happening already, to track as much as they can, to collect data on what is working with their outside counsel, what is working before various adjudicators, what is working in mediations, and then to derive from that what trends can be identified. Because I think we like to think of every matter as truly unique, but the fact is, when you have lots of disputes over the course of those matters, there are some trends, there are some similarities that can be derived in terms of the way a law firm may approach things, in terms of the way a judge or an arbitrator may approach things, in terms of the way a mediator may approach things, and finding those trends and translating them back into your strategy will just make you all the wiser about how you approach your disputes.
That's a really good point. And I can think of a couple of different examples. So for example, Bickle and Allen just released their report on cost and investment treaty arbitration to assess how much money investors and states are spending on the investment treaty arbitration process, which helps to inform clients about their cost expectations if they do embark on an investment treaty arbitration. Another example I can think of is arbitrator intelligence, which is trying to gather data on arbitrators, which again is useful for clients when they're making decisions about who to appoint. So I totally agree with you that having this data can help us inform the strategy. And actually another idea I can think of is I recently attended an ICC webinar, which looked at the success rates of emergency arbitrations, and that's actually relatively low. So that might inform clients' expectation when they decide to apply or not to apply for emergency arbitration.
No, those are all great examples. And I think the Queen Mary White and Case report that comes out also identifies various trends occurring based on data collected. That data may even be collected as it is there through surveys, but nonetheless, harvesting the experiences of a broad range of advocates, neutrals, parties can be very helpful in informing your practice and informing your strategy.
Absolutely. And my last question for you is, what is your advice for young practitioners in the ADR field, including those who are looking for a career in-house?
So that's another great question. I think that it is really important to keep a broad lens on your career, which is to say, I think sometimes people get a little too narrow in saying, I need to do or I want to do this or that. And that's going to limit you. I think to the extent you can keep a broader lens on the kinds of things that may be of interest to you, that will provide more opportunity, be it in your outside practice or be it going in-house. The transition to in-house, which has become increasingly popular over the years that I have been engaged in legal practice, is it's a competitive field. of folks who want to get in-house, I often advise folks who come to me and say they're interested in doing so, focus on the clients you're representing. That is your single best source of referral, or maybe even identifying an opportunity. Going back to, again, understanding the client and understanding the needs, getting to know the in-house counsel, getting to know your client, showing them, as I imagine you would, your acumen, your ability, your investment, your dedication to their needs is the best referral for your ability to serve those needs as an in-house counsel. And at some point, sharing with somebody you have a relationship with that you're interested in making that transition, even if it's not into that particular client because they don't have an opening or an opening that works for you. They often know of other openings. You're on their radar screen. This may allow them, when they hear of another opening, to refer it back to you. But I would say that is your single best source. The clients you're working with, the clients you're representing, make sure that you really get to know them and express to them this interest that you may have in going in-house. And my sense is that may be one of the best ways you'll land an in-house position.
Thank you so much, Allen, for your time and for sharing your wonderful insights. And thank you to our audience for tuning in.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you to Y-ADR. Thank you to the whole community for all of your support and for this wonderful program. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat today.